Good morning to you, sir. Nice to see you again. So Oxford Business Group came out with its latest report, Mongolia 2015. What's OBG's key takeaway from this last report?
Well, key takeaway, as one politician said, nothing is ever as good or as bad. Mongolia survived yet another market test. It showed itself to be quite a resilient economy, with the banking sector in particular showing some strength. At the same time, the last year proved to all of us that Mongolia, just like any other emerging new frontier market, is very vulnerable to external macroeconomic shocks, specifically the change in commodity prices, which hit the economy really hard. At the same time, we were impressed by the flexibility, and the policy response this time round was much better. Having said that, for people living in Mongolia, this is not really good enough, and I think the main issue going forward right now will be seeking a consensus on key issues such as the development strategy for the country.
So in this report, you're basically taking a look back at the year 2014. One of the things that is notable about 2014 is we've seen a change in government last year, and also there's been a shift in tactics in terms of economic policy and so on. How do you think these will be reflected in Mongolia's future economic prospects?
Well, things are getting better. Directionally, although lots of investors have been disappointed, and there's been a lot of criticism of the way Mongolia handled economic policy, especially with regard to its investors. There's been a shift in attitude. There's been a realization that the situation cannot go on much longer. There's been re-engagement with key investors such as Rio Tinto, and a more realistic assessment of the policy options. So we saw much more focus on dealing with certain fiscal issues, on adjusting the investment policy in infrastructure, on a renewed effort to engage with third-party countries and partners such as India, Russia, of course Europe. So the direction is positive, but of course we are still waiting for that breakthrough moment when Mongolia returns to the first league of investable frontier markets. That will probably take another 12 to 18 months for the country to normalize in the eyes of the international investor community.
Based on what the government has been doing in the past few months, probably over a year now, the Prime Minister says Mongolia is back in the game now. Do you agree with that?
It certainly has a fighting chance. The situation is not as good as it was just a few years ago when Mongolia was considered to be the #1 frontier market. It's a much tougher, let's say, much steeper hill to climb, but certainly it's viewed now as normalizing again. I think investors are very more tolerant than sometimes media make it out to be. The investment community understands that emerging markets go through these intense policy debates about how to manage resources. They are more vulnerable than advanced economies to external shocks, as I mentioned earlier. So investors are willing to look through some issues that the Mongolia face, the challenges, so long as the key is the commitment to certain policy directions. First of all, fair treatment of international companies that risk their capital, of course rule of law, and some commitment to economic growth targets and fiscal policy, i.e. some degree of macroeconomic stability. So long as these conditions are assured, I'm certain that investors will return to Mongolia, and Mongolia will once again be one of the most attractive FDI destinations that we cover.
So a number of investment summits and forums have taken place so far. There are still more to come that we're waiting. Do you think these can bring promising results to Mongolia?
Well, definitely. As I said, the current mood and the debate and the attitude of the government is very promising. So internationally, there's no lack of goodwill, if you like. Right now, it's everything about the devil is in the details. We need to see good progress on the Rio Tinto deal, not just the broad agreements, but actual action. We need to see some funding. So we get back into business as usual. Once that is the case, I think very quickly you're going to see some significant progress and interest from international investors.
Now about the challenges. Mongolia is going to have its general election next year and the presidential election in the year following. Do you think that's something we should be concerned about? What are the major challenges in fulfilling those priorities you just named out in the future?
Well, I hope that we can learn from mistakes of the past few elections and avoid the debilitating scenario of what I call brinkmanship, of constantly trying to push the debate to the radical edge of it's everything or nothing. And politicians have made that mistake of framing the policy debate in stark and black and white colors, as if foreign investors are either good or bad, or indeed one policy is much superior over the other. It's been as a consequence the expectations of the population have been unrealistic. Politicians definitely overpromised in terms of delivering wealth. As a result, they made commitments, especially fiscal commitments, that they could not really realistically meet. I hope for realism. I trust that the Mongolian population is much smarter, much more aware of the pitfalls of what I call politicking, of petty time discussions simply in order to win the elections without the substance of the policy debate. I think in these elections we are looking for more substance and more, as I mentioned earlier, key priorities, consensus building. So there's some kind of agreement between the parties. There are red lines that cannot be moved.
Okay, so thank you very much for taking your time to talk to us.